My phone buzzed on the patio table with the kind of frantic urgency usually reserved for an Amber Alert or a flash flood warning. It was a text from Chloe next door. There was no witty banter, no emoji, just a single ominous screenshot. The picture was me. It was a grainy, zoomed-in shot, clearly taken from a window across the street. I was in my driveway, leaning against the fender of my half-disassembled 1968 Mustang, a greasy rag in one hand and a look of profound concentration on my face. Or maybe it was constipation. It was hard to tell. Above the photo, on the header of the official Estates at Willow Creek Community Facebook page, was a block of text that made the hairs on my arms stand at attention. Attention, residents. The all caps was a nice touch, very stable. This is the man at 124 Oak Drive who is destroying our community's property values and harmonious ethos. He is a dangerous and aggressive individual who has threatened me personally. He refuses to follow our rules and has no respect for this community. I am genuinely concerned for my safety. Please, be aware of this man, and let's all make sure he knows he is not welcome here. My full street address. My picture. A pack of lies gift-wrapped in a bow of faux concern. I stared at the screen, a cold pit forming in my stomach. This was doxing. Pure and simple. This had escalated far beyond passive-aggressive notes and frivolous complaints. My job, the one I was on a long medical leave from, had taught me a few things. First, how to take a punch. Second, how to tell when someone's just crossed a line they can never uncross. As if on cue, a silver minivan I didn't recognize slowed to a crawl in front of my house. A woman with a haircut I could only describe as a tactical bob was pointing her phone at me from the passenger seat. The van lingered for a moment, a motorized predator casing its prey, before speeding off. 5 minutes later, a beat-up sedan full of teenagers did a drive-by. "Get a real job, narc," one of them yelled, his voice cracking with the sheer force of puberty. A half-full cup of soda flew from the window, arcing through the pristine suburban air and landing with a wet smack on my perfectly manicured lawn, leaving a dark, sugary stain on the fescue. I looked at the stain. I looked at my house, the one place on earth that was supposed to be my sanctuary, and I looked back at the phone, at my own face staring back at me under a banner of slander. The snarky, world-weary homeowner who had been amused by this whole ridiculous charade evaporated. The part of me I'd been trying to suppress for the last 3 months, the cold, methodical, and deeply unimpressed part, came roaring back to the surface. "All right, Brenda, you wanted my attention, you've got it. So, how did I get here? How did my government-mandated decompression in the land of picket fences turn into a low-stakes psychological warfare campaign?" It all started 3 months ago with a moving truck and a tape measure. After a particularly nasty disagreement with a gentleman whose hobbies included arms trafficking and resisting arrest, I'd ended up with 2 bullets in my thigh and a department-mandated 6-month leave. "Rest, Ryder," my boss had said. "Go fishing. Learn to bake sourdough, for God's sake. Just try to be normal for a little while." Normal to me was a foreign country with confusing customs and a language I didn't speak. But I decided to give it a shot. I cashed in some savings and bought a house in the Estates at Willow Creek, a place so idyllic it looked like the set of a pharmaceutical commercial. The lawns were greener, the skies were bluer, and every house was painted in a slightly different shade of inoffensive beige. It was a psychological operation designed to lull you into a state of beige complacency. After my recent professional history, beige was looking pretty damn good. My one concession to my own personality was my project. A rusted-out 1968 Ford Mustang Fastback I'd bought online. It was my therapy. My plan was to build a small, detached workshop in the backyard. A sanctuary of steel and grease where I could escape the deafening quiet of the suburbs and listen to classic rock, while I brought the machine back to life. I hadn't even gotten all the boxes inside when she first appeared. She moved with a preternatural silence, materializing at my elbow like a low-budget horror movie villain. She was in her 50s, with sharp, bird-like features, hair sprayed into a rigid helmet, and eyes that scanned my property for violations like a T-800 scanning for John Connor. In her hand, she held a clipboard and a yellow measuring tape. "I'm the president of the Homeowners Association," she announced, foregoing trivialities like names or greetings. Her tone implied this title put her somewhere between a queen and a deity. "Jack Ryder," I said, extending a hand she completely ignored. "Welcome to the estates," she continued, her eyes fixed on the moving truck. "I just wanted to point out that Section 4, Sub-Article B of the Community Bylaws states all commercial vehicles must be parked within 18 inches of the curb. Your truck appears to be—" She squinted, then unspooled her tape measure with a dramatic snap. 21 inches. I blinked. She was serious. "Wow, you're good. You eyeball that? Or do you have radar built into those sunglasses? Because that's a skill set my colleagues in asset logistics would kill for." My sarcasm flew about 6 feet over her lacquered hair. "It's important that we all adhere to the rules that keep this community beautiful," she said, making a crisp note on her clipboard. "You'll receive a written warning in your mailbox. A second violation results in a $50 fine." She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes and glided away, leaving me standing in my driveway, bewildered. The war had begun, and I hadn't even known I'd enlisted. A few days later, while wrestling with a recycling bin that apparently needed its cardboard flattened to a molecular level, I met Chloe Martinez from next door. She was watering her hydrangeas, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Let me guess," she said, nodding at the bin. "The lid wasn't perfectly flush?" She sent me an email with a time-stamped photo, I said, utterly defeated. Subject line, "Bin lid violation. First warning." Chloe laughed, a genuine, pleasant sound in the oppressive silence of the neighborhood. "Welcome to the Thunderdome. I'm Chloe, and you've just met Brenda Perkins, our beloved Führer." "Jack, and that seems like a fair assessment." "Trust me, it's generous," she said. "She tried to find me last year because my wind chimes were, and I quote, excessively melodic. I'm a lawyer. I sent her back a 10-page letter threatening a lawsuit for acoustic harassment and citing several precedent-setting cases on the right to residential enjoyment. She backed off. For now. She became my guide to the local political landscape, my Virgil in the HOA inferno. She warned me that Brenda's power was absolute, her grip on the community total. When I told her my plan to build a workshop, her face fell. "Oh, Jack," she said, shaking her head slowly, "you're walking into the lion's den with a stake tied around your neck." Chloe was, of course, right. Naively trying to do things by the book, I drew up professional plans for a tasteful, single-car garage that would be mostly hidden by the trees in my backyard. I submitted them to the HOA's Architectural Review Committee, or ARC. It turned out the ARC consisted of one person, Brenda Perkins. The first rejection arrived via certified mail a week later. The plans were denied. Reason: the proposed structure's roof pitch is not in harmonious aesthetic alignment with the prevailing community ethos. I stared at the words. Community ethos? I muttered to myself. What is this, a neighborhood or a cult? Annoyed but not yet defeated, I paid the architect another $200 to revise the plans, making the workshop's roof pitch identical to my main house. I resubmitted them. The second rejection was even more baffling. Denied again. Reason: proposed exterior siding color obsidian slate is not on the pre-approved palette of gentle taupe, soothing sandstone, or agreeable gray. Agreeable gray? I said out loud to my empty kitchen. Was that a color or a personality requirement for living here? It was clear Brenda had no intention of ever approving my project. Any project. Her goal wasn't adherence to the rules, it was the exercise of power for its own sake. Before I went any further, I decided I needed a professional. I needed a contractor who spoke fluent bureaucratic nonsense. I found Sal Vitale online. His company's motto was, "We build it right. No headaches." Sal was a man in his 60s, built like a fire hydrant with a thick New Jersey accent and hands like catcher's mitts. He showed up in a dusty Ford F-250, took one look at my house, and nodded. "Solid foundation, good bones." I invited him in and showed him the rejection letters. He held the second one, squinting at it through his bifocals. He read the part about agreeable gray, and then let out a bark of a laugh that echoed through my house. "Harmonious aesthetic alignment?" he cackled, slapping the letter down on my counter. "Let me translate that for you, kid. It means the Wicked Witch of the West over there doesn't want you building anything. Period. This ain't about roof pitches. This is about control." "So what do I do?" I asked. "Well," he said, a twinkle in his eye, "you can give up. Or you can hire me, and we can give this broad a real reason to be mad." I liked Sal instantly. "When can you start?" Before we could break ground, however, came the pivotal moment. I was venting my frustrations to Chloe over beers on her deck one evening, recounting Sal's assessment. "He's right," she said, her legal mind whirring. "This is arbitrary and capricious. It's a classic abuse of power. Let me see the CC and Rs." I brought over the 3-inch binder of covenants, conditions, and restrictions that had come with the house. For the next hour, Chloe pored over the dense legalese, her brow furrowed in concentration. The sun set, the crickets started their nightly symphony, and then she looked up, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "I found it," she whispered, as if Brenda had listening devices planted in the petunias. "Article 9, Section 3. Look." She pointed to a paragraph. It was dense, but the gist was clear. The Archie had absolute authority over any modifications attached to the primary residence and any cosmetic changes to the exterior. But then there was a subsection she'd circled in red ink. It specified that detached auxiliary structures under 200 square feet were subject only to city and county zoning ordinances, not ARC aesthetic approval. My proposed workshop was 198 square feet. It was a loophole, a glorious, beautiful loophole. Brenda, in all her meticulous tyranny, had overspecified in one area and left a massive blind spot in another. "As long as you get the city permit," Chloe said, grinning, "she can't legally do a damn thing to stop you." The next morning, I was at the city planning office when it opened. Thanks to a few polite but firm calls to old contacts in various government branches who owed me favors, my permit application, which normally would have taken weeks, was approved and stamped by lunchtime. I had it laminated at a copy shop on the way home. The following Monday, at precisely 7 a.m., the war went from cold to hot. The rumble of Sal's backhoe was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of progress, of freedom, of righteous defiance. His crew, a team of grizzled professionals who looked like they'd just stepped out of a Scorsese film, got to work with brutal efficiency. It took Brenda exactly 7 minutes to appear. She was wearing a pink velour tracksuit and slippers, a Medusa in loungewear. She marched across her lawn and onto my property line, phone held high, recording everything. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked over the diesel engine. "All work is to cease immediately. You do not have ARC approval." I was waiting for her on my porch, sipping a hot coffee. "Morning, Brenda. Beautiful day for some light excavation, isn't it?" I held up the laminated city permit. Got my permit right here. You want a copy? I made extras." Sal, a master of this particular art form, shut down the backhoe and ambled over. He was the picture of calm. "Ma'am, you're on an active construction site. For insurance purposes, I'm gonna have to ask you to step back behind your own boxwoods." "This is an unapproved structure," she screeched. "I will have this shut down. I will fine you into oblivion." "Go right ahead," Sal said with a shrug. "Send the fines to my office. My lawyer uses them for kindling. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're burning daylight." He gave her a polite nod, climbed back into his machine, and resumed digging a very large hole in my backyard. Brenda stood there for a full minute, her mouth opening and closing like a beached fish. Defeated on the legal front, she retreated. But I knew, and Chloe knew, and Sal knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the insurgency. Her campaign of petty terror began the next day. She called the city code enforcement office so many times they assigned a dedicated inspector to my case. His name was Dave, a weary man with the perpetually exhausted expression of someone who spends his days mediating disputes over fence heights and unpermitted bird baths. The first few times he came, he was formal, carrying a clipboard and checking Sal's permits. By the second week, he'd just pull up, roll down his window and yell, "Everything good, Jack?" "All good, Dave," I'd yell back. "She says our dirt pile is a half-inch too high today." Dave would sigh, make a U-turn, and drive away. Next came the sabotage. Sal's crew arrived one morning to find the entire foundation trench flooded. Brenda's sprinkler system, which was on a timer, had mysteriously been reprogrammed to run for 6 hours overnight, aimed directly at my yard. Sal just laughed, brought in a pump, and sent Brenda a bill for the rental fee and 4 hours of his crew's labor for water mitigation services. Then there was the surveillance. A brand-new top-of-the-line security camera appeared on the side of her house, aimed not at her own property, but directly at my backyard. The little red recording light was always on. This didn't deter Sal. It inspired him. He bought a garden gnome. Every morning his crew would place the gnome in a different, ridiculous pose directly in the camera's line of sight. One day it was sunbathing on a tiny towel. The next it was fishing in a bucket of water. My personal favorite was when they staged a tiny crime scene around it with caution tape made from a yellow ribbon. Brenda also began a social engineering campaign, going door to door to poison the well. She told people I was an abrasive recluse, a government spook building some kind of bunker. She painted me as a monster who was single-handedly dragging their property values into the abyss. Most neighbors just nodded politely and closed the door, but she managed to recruit a few acolytes, a small squadron of fellow busybodies who would now stare at my house whenever they walked their dogs. The pressure was constant, a low-grade hum of harassment designed to wear me down. But with Sal's good humor and Chloe's steadfast support, it was manageable. It was absurd. It was, in its own weird way, almost funny. Until it wasn't. Until the day she decided to put my face and my address on the internet and invite the world to my door, which brings us back to the present. Me, on my lawn, staring at a stain from a flying soda cup. The buzz of Chloe's text still vibrating in my hand. The slow-crawling cars. The shouted insults. This wasn't a game of garden gnomes anymore. She had made my home a target. My training kicked in, a calm, cold clarity washing over the anger. Assess the threat, control the situation, end it. Brenda Perkins made the final, fatal mistake for me. Seeing the minor commotion her post had created, she picked up her phone and did what she did best. She called the authorities to report a crime that wasn't happening. 15 minutes later, 2 local police cruisers rolled silently up to the curb. My heart didn't even beat faster. I was on home turf now. This I understood. This was a language I spoke fluently. A young, eager-looking officer I pegged as the rookie, Miller, got out of the first car. The second officer was older, with tired eyes and a salt-and-pepper mustache. Davis, the veteran. He had the unmistakable air of a man who had seen every possible permutation of human stupidity, and was deeply, profoundly over it. Brenda was ready for them. She met them on her lawn, hand clutched to her chest in a gesture of pure melodrama. The tears were already welling in her eyes. It was a masterful performance. "Oh, thank God you're here, officers," she cried, her voice trembling. She pointed a shaky finger at me, standing calmly on my own front porch. "That man, he's been terrorizing me for weeks. He's building an illegal structure, and when I, as the HOA president, tried to inform him of the rules, he became aggressive. Now he's outside, acting erratically, trying to intimidate the whole neighborhood. I fear for my safety." Officer Davis let out a sigh so heavy it could have registered on the Richter scale. It was the sigh of a man who knew he was about to waste an hour of his life he would never get back, mediating a fight that started over the color of a mailbox. He turned his weary gaze on me. "Sir," he began, his voice flat with practiced neutrality. "Can I get your side of the story?" This was the moment, the culmination of 3 months of nonsense. I didn't say a word. I walked slowly down my 3 porch steps and onto the grass, my hands visible the entire time. I stopped about 10 feet from them, close enough for them to see me clearly, far enough not to be a threat. Brenda watched with a smug, triumphant look on her face. She thought she had won. I reached slowly into my back pocket, pulled out my plain leather wallet and flipped it open. Inside, nestled against the worn leather, was my credentials and the polished eagle-topped medallion of the United States Marshal's Service. I held it up, angled so both officers could see it perfectly in the late afternoon sun. My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of the snarky homeowner. It was the calm, clipped, professional tone I used when I was on the clock. "Deputy U.S. Marshal Jack Ryder," I said, meeting Officer Davis's eyes. "The story is this. That woman—" I nodded my head towards a suddenly very still Brenda. "Published my home address, a photograph of me, and my vehicle information on a public social media forum. She then used that platform to incite harassment against a federal law enforcement officer. That's a felony. She also just filed a false police report, which I believe is a misdemeanor in this state. You'll find all the evidence you need on her phone and the community Facebook page. My side of the story is that I'm the victim of a targeted harassment campaign, and she is the perpetrator." The change in the atmosphere was instantaneous and absolute. It was like a switch had been flipped. The rookie, Miller, just stared, his jaw slack. But Davis, the veteran, reacted instantly. His posture straightened. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, focused alertness. He looked from my badge to my face, to the sputtering Brenda, and back to my badge. All the pieces of the puzzle, the constant calls, the weird complaints, the endless drama from this one block, clicked into place for him. He understood everything. "Ma'am," Davis said, his voice now devoid of any warmth or patience. It was pure ice. "Is what he said true? Did you post his personal information online?" Brenda's face had gone from triumphant to confused to terrified in the span of about 5 seconds. "Well, he was violating the bylaws. I was just informing the community of a threat." Davis turned to his partner. "Miller, go sit in the car and run his credentials, now." He then turned back to me, his tone dropping to one of professional respect. "Sir, my apologies for the intrusion. Let's talk over here." He walked with me towards my driveway, leaving Brenda standing alone and bewildered on the lawn. "We've had more calls from this woman in the last 3 months than the rest of the town combined," Davis said under his breath. "We knew she was a nut, but this is a whole other level. You want to press charges?" "What I want," I said, my voice low and firm, "is for it to stop. I want a formal report filed documenting the doxing, the harassment, and the false report. I want her to understand, in no uncertain terms, the kind of legal jeopardy she is in. I want her to be so terrified of the consequences that she never speaks my name again." Davis nodded slowly. "Consider it done, Marshal." He walked back over to Brenda, who looked like her entire world had just imploded. I couldn't hear every word, but I could hear the tone. It was the sound of a police officer reading someone the riot act. I heard phrases like felony charges, federal offense, civil liability, and malicious harassment. He informed her that if they received one more call to this block that wasn't a legitimate life-or-death emergency, he would be back with a detective and a warrant. When he was done, Brenda was pale and shaking. She didn't look at me. She just scurried back into her house like a frightened crab. The story of the badge flip went through the estates at Willow Creek like a wildfire. The legend grew with each telling. By the time it reached the far end of the neighborhood, I was apparently a deep-cover operative who had taken down a drug cartel from my garage. Sal and his crew were my tactical team, and the garden gnome was a sophisticated surveillance device. The entire dynamic of the neighborhood shifted overnight. The next morning, I found a basket of blueberry muffins on my porch with an anonymous note that just said, "Thank you." People who used to avoid my gaze now waved enthusiastically. The cars that drove by my house now did so at a respectful speed. Chloe and I, using the police report as leverage, drafted a cease and desist letter so legally terrifying it probably could have been classified as a weapon. We also sent a formal complaint, co-signed by a dozen other residents who had been terrorized by Brenda for years, to the other HOA board members. Faced with the threat of being named as co-conspirators in a lawsuit filed by a U.S. Marshal, they folded like a cheap suit. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Brenda was voted out as president in a unanimous vote of no confidence. She didn't even show up. Her reign was over. 2 months later, the workshop was finished. It was a thing of beauty, painted in a defiant, unapproved shade of obsidian slate. Inside, the '68 Mustang was up on jacks, its new engine gleaming under the shop lights. To celebrate, I threw a neighborhood BBQ. Sal and his entire crew were the guests of honor, drinking my beer and telling war stories about the gnome. Dave, the code enforcement guy, even stopped by for a burger, off the clock. Chloe was by my side, her hand in mine, and we watched as our neighbors, truly our neighbors for the first time, laughed and talked freely on my lawn. The new HOA president, a terrified-looking accountant named Jerry, approached me nervously, holding a plate of potato salad. "Mr. Ryder, Marshal Ryder, sir," he stammered. "I just wanted to check. Are the tiki torches you have set up in compliance with the 5-foot setback from the property line?" I looked at him, then at the tiki torch, then back at him. I gave him a wide, friendly smile. "Jerry," I said, clapping him on the shoulder, "don't worry about it. Tonight they're in compliance." He let out a sigh of relief and scurried away. I came here for peace and quiet. Instead, I got a 3-month-long Cold War with a suburban dictator. But as I looked around at my finished workshop, the Mustang waiting for its moment of glory, and Chloe smiling up at me, I realized I'd found something better than quiet. I hadn't just built a garage, I'd accidentally liberated a small nation, and honestly, it felt pretty damn good.